Hi, drawing. So let's take a look at what you have to do for this assignment. So in the previous assignment, we talked about how to create the illusion of 3D space on a two-dimensional picture plane, and I talked about figure and ground. So you're going to experiment with this a little bit in this assignment, and you're also going to use something called an open composition, which is going to further give you that illusion of space by but it's going to further give you that illusion of space by indicating that there are things happening outside of the parameters of your picture plane. So if we look at, so this is the final drawing. This is an example of somebody's final drawing for this assignment. And if you notice, the entire drawing is, everything is cropped, right? It looks like it's the zoom in shot of, I think these are popsicles. I'm not really sure what it is. I want to say they're popsicles and little Madeleine cakes. So all four edges of this drawing are cropped, and it kind of looks like there's something beyond the edges of the page here, which adds to that illusion that there is space on the paper, within the picture plane or beyond the picture plane. So it creates that illusion that something else is going on outside of the picture plane, right? So what you guys are going to do is you're going to experiment with an open composition. An open composition is when you have this cropping and when you have objects that are clearly cropped off the edge of the page. And you're going to create, you're going to be using two objects, which I'm going to talk about more in just a second, but you're going to be using two objects for reference. And this is kind of going to be an imaginary composition where you're using this object and you're drawing the objects over and over again, but you're going to create this kind of imaginary floating composition that you're going to make up. So what I also have you do in this assignment is I have you do some thumbnails, and this was I just kind of did this in Photoshop just to represent the thumbnails. You're going to be required to do 8. I've done all 16 because I ask you to draw 16 rectangles on your page, just in case you need extra ones. At least they are there, so you don't have to go back and draw them again. But I've asked you to draw 16, and you're going to include at least 8. And you're going to do several sketches of possible compositions, because I want you to be paying attention to balance within the composition, just like we did in the last one when we were doing figure ground with your simple forms. But you're going to use real forms now that you're going to look at for reference for these drawings. But before you do the drawing, I want you to do these thumbnail sketches, because doing thumbnail sketches helps you, it helps you to think about the entire page before you start drawing, so that when you start drawing, you have some sort of a plan, and you don't just, you don't just start drawing, from any which area on the page. It gives you a plan, and it kind of helps you resolve how you're going to utilize all parts of the composition so that the composition becomes a little bit more balanced. I also want you to pay attention to scale of your objects and overlapping, which we talked about in the last assignment. And here's the handout. The handout is linked here, so you can review it. I'm really talking, what you really should be paying attention to in the handout is the overlapping. Let's just open this up. You want to be paying attention to overlapping, coincidence of edge, and size, yes, but more so overlapping and coincidence of edge, and size of shape and object. So anything that's bigger is going to look closer, and anything that's farther away is going to look, anything that is smaller is going to look farther away. We're not really working with position of shape an object because in these drawings, you're basically drawing from a top-down view. You're not drawing from kind of a frontal view, which is gonna indicate perspective. These are kind of these imaginary floating compositions, so it's a little bit of a different view. It's going to look kind of flat, but you're going to also include this overlapping, and you're going to avoid coincidental edges, and you're going to use cropping to create that sense of space in this drawing. So that is what an open composition is. Here's a little video that you can watch on how to on you know what an open composition is. You're going to be paying careful attention to balance of your composition, which is why I want you guys to do your thumbnails. Now I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. The way you're going to do your thumbnails is you're going to use your 3" by 4" viewfinder, because your 3" by 4" viewfinder that you use in your negative space drawings is going to give you the proper proportions, tongue twister, the proper proportions for this drawing. So if you were to do like a 4 by 4, that would give you a square, and your 18 by 24" paper is not a square, it's a rectangle that is very specific in terms of proportions. And your viewfinders that you made for your negative space drawing those are made using the proportions of your 18 by 24" paper. So I want you to take your viewfinder and I want you to trace the inside, or if you still have the cutout, you're going to trace the 3 by 4" rectangle 16 times, and then you're going to do 8 sketches in those little rectangles as reference before you go to this you know, to the final drawing, before you start the final drawing. So what I also want you to focus on in this assignment is form and content. Or I want you to be able to distinguish the difference between form and content. I didn't put subject in there because we're going to talk about subject in here in just a second, but there's a difference between form and content. Form is basically, you know, is it a drawing? Is it a painting? Is it a sculpture? What is it using? Is it using line? Is it using texture? Is it using shading? Are you using ink? Are you using paint? Are you using photography? So form is kind of how it's made, and it's the like visual description of what you are seeing. And content is what the piece of art is about. So let's jump down here, and maybe we will come back up here. I'll go back up there and look at some things. But if we look at these two images, they're both images of women, and they're both images of women with kind of long hair, right? But the content is very different. What they, you know, this one on the left is a photo, and this one on the right is, I want to say it's like ink or print. Let's see, what is it? It will tell you. Just look on JSTOR, and it will tell you what this is. So they're different forms, right? And they're also the different content, but they use the same subject to communicate different ideas. They're, you know, they are different forms. So this one is a photo and this one is a drawing. So that is something that you should note as well. But what I really want you to notice in these two photos is that the ideas and the, you know, the information that you're getting from both photos is different, even though they are representing the same subject, which in this case would be women with relatively long hair, right? So let me think, where else can I go with this? I think I've gone over everything here. So what I want you to do in terms of your subject is I want you to pick two, let's see, I want you to pick two objects. Here it is. Two objects that have a specific relationship to each other. So in the example, hold on, let me pause this and pull that up. Okay, so in the example, this person has used popsicle sticks and I want to say Madeline cookie cakes, right? So what's the relationship between these two things? They're both sweets, right? I think I've added, yeah. So here, if we look at these examples on the, let's start from the right. So you have a piece of fruit and you have a knife. So there is a very clear relationship between the fruit and the knife. We're going to use the knife to cut the fruit, right? So what is it telling us? What is the idea behind the piece? I mean, these are going to be relatively simple pieces. They're not going to be complex. The content is not going to be overly complex, but this is kind of how you start thinking about this. And here we have scissors and ribbon, right? And I think it was interesting how this person kind of made the ribbon look like it was kind of, you know, moving throughout the drawing. It's not, it looks interesting that it's like one continuous piece of ribbon. I thought that was a very nice touch. Here on the left, we have skulls and knives. What does that say? It's kind of like a dark, morbid kind of idea. When we think about what the drawing might be about. Let's also look at how they're using foreground, background, negative shape, how they're using overlapping to move our eye throughout the composition. So let's zoom in here to this one. I thought this one, if we look here, something is happening here where it kind of cuts this composition in half, because this knife is creating this very strong horizontal line, and it's going right to this skull here, and it's creating this focal point, which you kind of want to avoid for this project because it should be this overall open composition. So be careful that you don't create a very strong focal point for these. It also is kind of cutting the composition in half, where you have this top half and this bottom half, and it creates this very strong dividing line. So maybe had this person, kind of made the knife go diagonal and maybe brought this skull down a little bit, it would kind of move our eye from this skull down the knife this way. There would be a skull here, and then there would be like a negative space here, and then there would be this kind of hatchet, and then our eye might move over here. So think about how your eye, or how you're going to create movement for your viewer's eye with the elements that you use in your drawing. This person, again, has used this ribbon to move our eye all throughout the drawing. And, if you pay attention to the white areas, the negative space, pay attention to the size of the negative space. This person was very conscious about how they what the negative space was doing. Here it's a little bit less. I feel like the negative space was considered a little bit less, but was still considered, because there are good negative spaces in this drawing as well. I think the negative space in this drawing becomes a little bit more activated because everything looks so very carefully and consciously kind of planned and organized. And this is what I want you to do with those thumbnail drawings. I want you to use the thumbnail drawings to kind of plan out how these are going to be balanced compositions, and how you can use those as a tool, as a planning tool for the drawing before you start the drawing, so it's not so intimidating for you. What I also want to talk about is the way that you can use overlapping to create this kind of continuous and implied line throughout your drawings. So in this drawing, the knives there's a lot of overlapping going on. So if I start on this knife here, I can go up this way, I go up this way, I go this way, I go that way, I can come back here this way in this direction, then go down this way, and then come to this knife down here, go up, up, up. There's a lot of different paths for my eye to kind of follow. And I want you to think about how you might also do that as well. How will you use overlapping to create these kind of, visual paths for the viewer's eye to move all around and all throughout the drawing? It's happening here with the ribbon. It happens here with the knives. It happens in different ways, right? Because the knives are very, rigid and the ribbon is kind of organic and flowing. I think it happens a little bit less here. I mean, this knife points in this direction, so it kind of helps move our eye that way. And then we have the skull, and it happens here and it happens here, but it kind of stops, right? Which is part of the reason why I think this composition was not as balanced. And think about, when you use strong, like this knife is very horizontal. And if you use very strong horizontal lines and very strong vertical lines, they're not as energetic and they don't indicate as much movement as if you use diagonal lines, which is what's happening in these two. It's really happening very well in these two drawings. It is happening here, but it's not as visually unified as on, as these two drawings on the right. And let's see the example here. It's also doing it here. There's a lot of diagonals. There's not too many horizontal lines, and there's not a lot of vertical lines. So there's a lot of movement here. There's a lot of overlapping, and, we can, move throughout this drawing pretty well. So if we start here, there's lots of different paths for our eye to follow. Okay, so I scrolled back up to the top of this lesson. And I also just want you to pay attention to the fact that, just because we are doing an open composition, which is you're going to use all four edges of your page, to use an open compositional approach for this drawing. But just because we're doing that doesn't mean that that has to happen in every drawing that you ever do. So if we look at this drawing, there is a sense that it's going off the top and going off the bottom, and maybe it kind of goes off the side. I would say yes, it kind of, is an open composition on the right and the left, but some could argue that this is not really an open composition on the right and left because the fruit is really the main subject here, and that's what we're focused on. We're not really focused on the table. So you can vary your argument here. It's really how you are interpreting the drawing here. This is this is a closed composition. This is a closed composition. I mean, yeah, okay, the table, again, we have this variation with the table, but I think this is a closed composition. This is a closed composition. So think about different ways that you might experiment with open compositions, and moving forward for the next assignment, you're also going to think about how you can utilize open compositions to further create this illusion, of more things going on outside of the picture plane than the viewer might actually see. Lastly, I'm going to jump back up here. I want you to explore with mark making in these, and I want you to explore with a variety of media and materials. So if we go down to the directions, did I give you... Where are the directions? Okay, it says you're going to use your 18 by 24 inch paper. You're going to use 2 sheets. You're going to use one for the thumbnails, one for the final drawing. You're going to pick the material that you want, and you're going to experiment with mark making and using that material to prepare you for the final project, which is going to be a narrative still life coming up. So give yourself enough time. You should spend quite a bit of time on this drawing. It's a little bit more developed, and you have a little bit more opportunity to utilize, try to find ways to be a little bit more creative and expressive with your materials. And if you guys have questions, email me, and if not, I will see you on Canvas.